We'll begin by just giving a general overview of some of the new features in Civil 3D, and they're really catered around these four main topics here. User experience, you're going to see that there are a number of different tweaks, some as subtle or as simple as a cosmetic overhaul to the way that Civil 3D looks, certainly matching all the other products that are part of the Autodesk umbrella, so at least you have that sort of very consistent look. That way, if you're moving between products, you'll have a pretty good handle on how one works as opposed to the other. Detailed engineering, so you'll see that there are going to be a number of tools that help us refine, primarily for profiles and corridors, how we go about our design practice. With production drafting, you'll see that there's been some cool little tweaks to some of the way that labeling works. And last but not least, certainly collaboration, the ability to get in and out of Civil 3D as well as sharing data amongst other applications. You'll see a couple of new features with regards to that. So we'll start off with just talking about some of the user experience changes. I don't know that all of you might have attended Reed Addis's webinar on What's New in AutoCAD 2015, but What's New in AutoCAD obviously is very relevant to What's New in Civil 3D because Civil 3D sits on top of AutoCAD. So all the changes that take place for AutoCAD are certainly part of Civil 3D. I obviously won't have enough time to just do all the AutoCAD and all the Civil 3D, but I'll point out a couple of the changes that are fairly relevant. You'll see that there's an updated UI, a user interface. So again, you have the ability to have a consistent look throughout all your different AutoCAD-based products. There have been a number of notable features for enhanced feedback. So wish list items and general support for problems have been sort of refined in the way that you can contribute to them. A couple new tweaks to existing features is the geographic location, which allows you to now have the ability to keep some of the aerials that you were pulling from Bing Maps through your Subscription Center account and make them available offline. And then last but not least, point cloud performance has been improved so that you get a little bit more refinement in the way that you can interact with point clouds, and the density and the number of point cloud points has been significantly increased. So what I'll do, instead of just running through a series of slide decks and boring everybody, I'll go ahead and I'll just jump over to our first quick demonstration of Civil 3D. And we'll start off with just a general overview of the user interface. And you can see here that, for the most part, your opening screen when you first launch Civil 3D is broken down into two main sections. There's a Learn and there's a Create. You'll be first always brought into the Create tab, where you can just have some of the typical things that you'd associate with starting any new project or drawing or continuing an existing one. You'll see a list of your recent documents that can be pinned. You'll see the ability to start a new drawing from the default template or from choosing a particular template, as well as some of the other additional open features, opening a sheet set template, exploring some of the sample drawings that come with Civil 3D, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see that the ability to connect and send feedback directly through that user interface is given to you right away. So you can voice your complaints and disgruntled comments right over to Autodesk for their review. And as pointed out in the recent documents, you can simply toggle between a larger thumbnail, a thumbnail with some details, or a full detail list for this recent documents. On the left side, that you can either toggle through the left click down here or a left click through to the left, you have a section dedicated to learning Civil 3D. Obviously, some of you, as I can see the attendee list, have been using Civil 3D for a long time. Some of you I don't know personally, and there are others of you that I know have just taken your first steps into using Civil 3D. So feel free to visit these videos if you're new or relatively new to Civil 3D. You can explore some of the new features. You can check out some of the getting started videos, as well as have a quick resource to online information, as well as any security updates, service packs, hotfixes, anything of that nature that gets pushed down through Autodesk for you to patch your Civil 3D with. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by just going into Open Files, and we're going to just take a look at some of the different UI features. Now, I'll point out some of the things very quickly as we go through it, and I'll just jump into this assumed geo.dwg file to point out, again, one of the very quick new features of Civil 3D. One thing that I'll illustrate about the UI that's changed is there's this dark interface. Again, you can very quickly go to your options and display and influence how exactly everything gets laid out here. But for the most part, you're going to have this color scheme dark being the default. One of the new features that we were discussing earlier in that slide deck is the ability to take off information offline. So if you're logged into your subscription center, you can see here as Costa, I'm logged in. And if I were to toggle on this aerial map, you'll see that I have a geo-referenced map located, and as I zoom in and out, that map fills in the information accordingly. Now, one thing that I can do if I am going to log off of Subscription Center, or I'm going to go and take my laptop and be somewhere where I don't have access to an online facility, either through Wi-Fi or a hotspot, I can go ahead and use a capture area to select an area that I'd like to keep for offline use. And now, as you see, if I turn off my aerial map, I still have that one aerial for that particular project limits. And you'll see that it adds a very simple, I forget the legal term for this, but just a courtesy of, and then where the information came from. You can see it came from Bing Maps, and that is pretty much all you need to know about that. All right. So let me go ahead and close this drawing. I'll just point out too, again, if you're not familiar with the tab interface, it came out in 2014. It's been a little bit more refined in 2015. You can see here I can start off a new tab, and then instead of jumping straight to a template, I can now choose to go ahead and open up some additional files. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the point cloud improvements. And there's nothing to see here really much more than the ability to very quickly navigate through a drawing that has a significant amount of point cloud data. So you'll see here if I bring up my reference manager, it's up on my second monitor, that I have a point cloud brought in from Recap. You can see the RCP extension. That's a product that comes as part of your design suite. As Lynn pointed out earlier in the presentation, there will be a recap presentation coming up in the next couple of weeks, so be sure to attend that if you want to learn a little bit more about point cloud data and how Recap processes all that information. You can see here that I brought in that information. I can very quickly navigate through a series of views, and by selecting that point cloud data, I have this nice little interface through my contextual ribbon that allows me to change the point size, get a little bit more clarity or blurriness, so to speak, with the point cloud, so everything appears to be a little bit more solid as opposed to points. I can change the level of detail, color mapping, et cetera, and create some additional crops. So some of these features aren't exactly brand new, but the ability to fly through, walk through, rotate, navigate around these point clouds has been significantly improved from earlier versions of AutoCAD and, of course, Civil3D. All right. And then last but not least, as part of what I'm going to discuss about new features within the UI world, is just some of the new AutoCAD features. And I'm going to just point out, too, that I thought were particularly useful. Let's go ahead and open this up. As some of you may have known or seen, the ability to lasso information now is quite simple. So in previous versions of AutoCAD, you could window to the right for a inside select. You could go to the left where you see the green for a crossing select. But now if you want to select via a particular shape, you just hold down your left mouse button, and you can see that I can create this sort of lassoed shape. And you can see by the highlighting that it's showing me which objects I've grabbed. So it makes it very easy to grab any particular group of objects and either manipulate them, delete them, so on and so forth. Other features within the AutoCAD umbrella, not particular to Civil3D, is the ability to preview some of the things that you're about to do. So you can see here, if I just simply execute the trim command, that by simply hovering over a line that's about to be trimmed, I can see a display view or sort of a preview of what's about to happen if I go ahead and I accept that. So if I go ahead and left-click and check and left-click and check, I have an idea of exactly what's about to happen. So no more guesswork as if I do click on this line, what's going to be trimmed. Same thing is true for anything along the lines of like filleting, another example of a great tool, right? So in previous versions, if I was going to go ahead and do a fillet and I had a radius of, let's say, 20, and I select my first line, I can now see a preview of what that would look like. And if that's not to my liking, I can go ahead and just go back to my radius, type in 30, and now hover again and get an idea of what that object looks like. So some of these preview features are AutoCAD-based, but they're certainly significant in your documentation process, regardless of whether you're using Civil3D or just plain AutoCAD. All right. So that wraps it up for the sort of introduction to the interface changes and some of the AutoCAD features. If I jump back now over to my slide deck, let's go ahead and talk about some of the more specific Civil 3D related improvements. So we'll start off, and again, this is going to be, I'm going to go over the next 3 slides sort of in one go. The slide deck in particular jumps over several new features, and I'd figure that it'd be easier to see them all in one shot as I move through. So the first section is called the detailed engineering, and you'll see that there is going to be several improvements for the way profiles are laid out. You can get notifications now if a profile changes in regards to where a horizontal alignment has been modified. You'll see that there is new corridor modeling enhancements, so that if I have, and this is going to be probably easier to view than explain, but any of you who have done some extensive corridor modeling know that some of the features, such as if you have an offset assembly or you're using an offset parameter to target, let's say, a width, the ability to micromanage some of the features within that region, whether it's the ability to add more frequent sections or the ability to keep replace a particular subassembly within the corridor and have it rebuild automatically with the exact targets, hasn't been available. So those are some of the things that I'll show you. And then not too many people I know are using SubAssembly Composer, unfortunately, I point out, because SubAssembly Composer, for those of you who don't know, gives you the ability to generate your own subassemblies. So I'm going to point out something very quickly as far as to what one of the new improvements to SubAssembly Composer is. And if you have any questions regarding that, you can feel free to shoot me an email offline, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The next section is related to production drafting, and this has to do with a handful of tools for increased performance in the way that Civil 3D currently functions. Some of my favorite annotation enhancements that I'll show you is the ability to relegate a label from one object to another. So in previous iterations of Civil 3D, if you've labeled a surface, let's say you threw in a spot elevation, and you wanted to label another surface, you had to delete the label that you had and add one that was particular to the other object that you wish to do. Now, simply through the Properties dialog window, you'll be able to go ahead and toggle the different objects that belong or pertain to that label, and you'll see the changes immediately take place. And Slice Solids refers to the ability to add AutoCAD 3D Solids to your Civil 3D sections or profiles. So the ability now to have a little bit more control over how AutoCAD Solids appear in projected views goes a long way, and you'll certainly get a demonstration on that as well. And then last but not least, some of the collaboration tools. And these are just a handful of things that allow you to export to a KML. A KML is a file extension that you can utilize within Google Earth. So if you wanted to geographically place your project inside of Google Earth for review or just simply demoing or helping a particular client or anybody who's interested in your project visualize what it is that you intend to do on a particular project, you can use Google Earth for doing that. And the enhanced export of DWG and DGN data, so DWG files and MicroStation DGN files. There's a whole process now for being able to export and import in those types of files. Obviously, MicroStation AutoCAD is proprietary to DWG, but you'll see that there's a significant improvement in the way that AutoCAD allows you to bring in MicroStation data. And then last but not least, one thing that might be not as fun to demo, but certainly just worth pointing out for sure, is the consistency between Civil 3D from versions 2013 up to the most current one, 2015. It relies obviously on the fact that all the DWG file formats are the same, but even object data now can be migrated amongst the versions that you see there. There are a couple of stipulations that I'll point out in the help menu, but if you're working typically internally, you're going to be working likely on a consistent version, but this is extremely important if you're actually working with several different consultants that might not have the same version of Civil 3D, even though they are using Civil 3D. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just point out a couple more things, and we'll just jump into our our Civil 3D demonstration. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just start off with some of the corridor modeling improvements. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a drawing, and here we go. Let's take a look, and we'll do this one here, DE, profile, and corridor. Now, for a full list, and some of the things that are listed as new features are very subtle or just very nuanced and not really worth demoing, but I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the help menu real quick, and you'll see that it's a web-based help, and it should be floating around here somewhere, and I don't see it. There it is. on my second screen. If you want a full list of the new features, just fire up the Help menu and go to New Features, and you'll see that pretty much there's a whole section. Most of this is, there's several things, right? New parts for the new SubAssembly, for new AutoCAD, for Map 3D. The new features within Civil3D fit on about an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so they're pretty easy to go through, and you'll see that they're conveniently have been linked to documents within the Help menu. So aside from seeing what I'm going to demo to you today, you'll see that the ability to go through and just dig down a little bit deeper and get some more details is available to you by just going to Getting Started, New Features within the Help menu. So a couple of new things about corridors. I'm going to start off with just targeting. And this is probably one of my favorite features inside of Civil3D as far as the new features. And they have to do with the way that corridors target and use subassemblies to additionally target outside areas. So you can see here in this drawing, I have a very simple corridor. It's made up of a series of lanes, and you can see here that there's a widening that was set up for a drop-off. Now, traditionally with targeting, there's two things that have always been the case with Civil3D, and I'm going to point out how they've been improved in this current version. The first has to do with the ability to jump between different sub-assemblies if you choose to replace them in the midst of a design. So I'm going to go ahead and split my view into two vertical. I'll point out a new AutoCAD feature, which is the ability to just drag and create one viewport bigger than the other as opposed to the traditional split. But on the left side, I'm going to go ahead and have my plan view, and on the right side, I'm going to go ahead and just find my subassembly. Now, I have it set up so that my corridor rebuilds automatically. I'm just going to uncheck that for a second just to illustrate a point. And in current versions of Civil3D, if you replace an element and it has targeting, so you can see here that this right lane is targeted to one of the polylines that extends across, right? And it's this one right there. And if you replace that object, you would lose the targeting. So one of the new features in Civil3D 2015 that I'll demonstrate is if I go ahead and I change one of the sub-assemblies that's used in the targeting, I'll have the ability to keep that targeting in place. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring up my tool palettes. You see I'm going to go over here to lanes, and I'm going to go ahead and go down to lane outside super multi-layer, right? So if I select that, you'll see that I get my properties dialog window, and at the command line, I have the ability to replace a subassembly. So all I have to do is left click to toggle that, and I can go ahead and choose the subassembly I choose to replace. Now I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you'll see that now you have the ability to keep similar targets. So for example, if my lane is currently targeting a polyline or an alignment to control its width, I can keep that being the same by just simply toggling keep similar targets. And now when I go ahead and press enter, Civil3D will warn me that I've made a change to that corridor, and simply rebuilding it shows you that that information hasn't changed. There is one caveat to that, and it's the way that the targeting works, and it relies on the targeting parameter name being the same. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull up my help menu for, actually, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and just pull up my targeting for this section, this region here. I'm going to move this over. And I'm going to just point out that you can see here that the width or offset targets, and I'm toggling this element over here on the right, is set to a target called width alignment. As long as you're using another subassembly that uses the same target name, you're good to go. If you were to choose something that has a different target name, you're going to see that it's not going to work, right? So if I go over here to basic and I choose, for instance, let's see, basic lane transition, right? If I go ahead and I choose that and I go here and I choose replace and I run through that same process, right? It'll ask me, hey, do you want to keep the similar targets? Now, instinctively, of course, I just did that before, so I'd like to do it again. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I'm going to end my selection, and I'm going to rebuild my corridor again. And this time, you're going to see that it's not targeting that alignment. And what's the reason for that? Now, the reason for that, if I go and bring up my target parameters, is that instead of being a width alignment, it's called a transition alignment. So you can see that this target name is different. That's why that wouldn't work. So just to give you a heads up, in case you're trying this on your own, just be aware of the target name that's being utilized by that subassembly, because that will make a difference of whether or not you can keep that similar target. All right? For the most part, again, all the targeting names are the same within a certain category, but especially if you're jumping between two very distinct types of subassemblies, you'll see that you may run into a little bit of trouble with that. So I'll go ahead and I'll just undo. We'll get back to where we were. We'll talk about the second aspect of Civil3D corridors that's kind of new and exciting. Now, in previous versions, of course, you're all familiar with frequency and how that applies to corridors. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick my corridor, and you'll see that through my contextual ribbing, I can go ahead and change the frequency. And the frequency, for those of you who are new to Civil3D, only implies that for any given corridor, how often is this assembly dropped in to create my Civil3D model. The new features allow me to do the following. You can see here that primarily, I'm going to target the one first, right, as just an example. And I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and cancel this and maximize this viewport so I can shift things over to the right. I'll do that again. I'll bring up my dialog window. Two of the new features are A, the ability to now set a frequency along curves other than just by an increment. So in previous versions, you remember you can set an alignment, a corridor frequency at an increment, and you would say 5 feet or 10 feet or 20 feet and so on and so forth. And it would apply it for tangents and curves by a value that was just linear, right? So every 5 feet, every 2 feet. That would be called an add an increment. What's new to 2015 is the ability to do it either by curvature or by both, right? So by curvature simply implies that if I toggle that I can use a middle ordinate distance to specify how those curves are set. Now, you can see here if I have a curve, right, the larger the radius, the less frequency I need to determine that. But if I came in down here and I set that to 0.05, right, it has nothing to do with the increment. If I just go ahead and click OK, you can see that now I have more sections here, just simply by the fact that I increased the frequency by curvature. For a larger curve, maybe that wouldn't make any difference, but on tighter curves, it would make a huge difference. And you can have it set by both, so it increments differently for curves than it does for tangents on a linear basis, but it also takes into consideration that if you have a tighter curve, that you have more assemblies placed. And then the second one that's relevant to the way that offsets are handled is that there's a whole set for offset targeting. So you can see here that at offset target geometry points, I can toggle this to yes, adjacent to the start and end, right? So this is important so that you have the exact location at where those offsets start and begin. And you can set an offset, an along offset target curves very similarly to above by either an increment or a curvature. And once again, if I set it by curvature, I can set a middle ordinate distance to simply rebuild this. And you can see here that automatically it's added a lot more sections right at this location. The beauty in this is that you don't have to split up the regions into distinct parts to increase the frequency of one versus the other. And this is true especially if you're going ahead and editing your information. So suppose I came in here and I moved my alignment to, let's say, there, right? So all I'm doing is I'm shifting that offset and I'm making that whole offset transition a lot longer. You'll see that it handles it accordingly, right, when I rebuild this surface, that along the tangents it keeps that 25 feet, but as it gets around curves, it makes those frequencies a lot more frequent, for lack of a better word, so that you get a more refined look to your model. All right. Now, let's go ahead and just close this drawing up. I don't need to save any of this. Take a look at some of the other features. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a very quick information. And let's bring up the site distance tool. Now, there's not really as much to be seen here as it is just to be pointed out, and I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the help menu real quick. And I'm going to bring up the site distance section, and I believe, okay, this is what I wanted to show you, right? So the way that site distancing is handled inside of Civil3D is just completely different. There's not much to demo other than pointing out that in previous versions, you'll see here that there's a section for checking site distance command. See, in the previous version, when an obstruction was encountered, the command reported that the actual site distance, 3 in the illustration below, right, this value here from your object that's looking to the target as the distance between the value of 1 was set at a particular value, right? So when you reported this, this is the value that you return. In the current version, you can see here that it's actually giving you the unobstructed view, right? So now when an obstruction is encountered, it reports the actual site distance, the entire length, not the distance to the obstructed view, all right? So just a significant way that site distance is now calculated. And just to go through the exercise, right, it's not that much different. if you wanted to go and just analyze and go to visibility check and check site distance, you'll see here that I bring up my dialog window. I'm going to leave most of these the same. I'm going to use that alignment, that profile. I'm going to add that surface, leave all the minimum site distance. I guess this would be based on AASHTO and eye height and target height, and so on and so forth. And the last thing I'd probably like to do is let me just bring up my layers, and we'll do some site obstruction, so sight lines. And then we'll go and say for obstructed, we'll do obstructed view. And then for these guys, we'll do obstructed areas and obstructed areas. Do an eye path. And we'll do a visible. Right? And so I can just click finish, and then you'll have that ability to see how that's, and I think I might have picked the wrong layer, get the wrong color, but you can see here that now it's set up very similarly. All right? So the only way that the feature's been improved is, again, through that help menu. If you go and just do a search, if you want to read a little bit more about it, type in site distance, and I believe it was in the second choice to calculate site distance along a corridor. You can see all that information. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'll close this up. And what I'm going to go ahead and do now is just show you some of the new features for profiles. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new drawing. And let's pull in, let's say, let's pull in this drawing right here. So the way that Civil3D handles some new features in profiles are as follows. I think one of the more interesting features is the ability to now do a couple of things that relate to curves and the way that profiles behave within a profile view. The first thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to go ahead and select that profile, and I'm going to bring up the geometry editor tools, and I'm going to go and point out that you have now the ability to extend an entity to the end of the profile view. So if you have ever a scenario where either you're doing some corridor modeling and you notice that on either end your corridor dips past the current finished profile down to elevation 0 because you don't have a long enough finished grade profile or design profile, you now have the ability to rectify that by just extending in kind to whatever, in this particular tangent slope, you have to the end of the profile view. So you can see here, and I have this 1.04% grade that ends right there just shy of that profile view. If I wanted to extend it just for design purposes, I go ahead and simply select that tool. You'll see I'll be prompted to select a sub-entity. I'm going to go ahead and hover over that and select that and press enter, and you can see now it adds a grade dash extension. So it just extended that tangent to the edge of the profile view. All right. As far as curves are concerned, if I go over here and I select free vertical curves, I'll point out that you have now the ability to, after selecting your first and second entity, I'll point out that, I'm sorry, I picked the wrong curve. There we go. Bear with me. Let's go there again. So free curve, parabola, first and second. And you can see that now I have the ability to select either a pass-through point, right, which you previously didn't, or your previous other ways, rank, radius, or length, right? So if I did length before, now I can go and jump back and go see pass-through. So pass-through is now one of the new features so that you can go ahead and specifically say, I need that curve to pass through, let's say that point right there. All right. One of the other features that's related to that is the way that Civil3D previously handled the way that you created objects, profile objects. So I'm going to go ahead and just toggle my entity-based selection, and I'm going to go ahead and select one of these curves. And you can see here that in previous versions, when a parameter constraint was locked, in this case, the way that this curve was generated, I wouldn't be able to edit it without deleting the curve and reapplying it. Now I can simply go into the parameter constraint lock, toggle that from true to false, and then I can change the way I want that to be labeled. So rather than a K value, I can specify a curve length, right? And in this case, if I wanted to make that an 80-foot length, I can just type in 80 and change that value on the fly. All right, so that ability to be able to do that without having to remove that curve and re-add it using those features is a nice little workflow that kind of saves you some time. One question that just came up is, does the profile extension always stay as a dashed line type, or is it layer controlled? At the moment, it's treating it as an extension. What you could do is just simply select that line through the grip, and I believe if you were to, actually I'm sorry, just finish adding the line from the endpoint on. Let's see if I can modify that through the style, right? So in the style, you can see here for display, for line extensions, it's being set to profile line extension, right? One thing I believe you could do if you wanted to edit that would be to extend the tangent all the way using a fixed element from start to end. But because it's an extension, it's being treated the same as the layering convention that you see here, right? So you see the dashed line continues from the PI all the way over to the end of the profile. So there was a couple other things I wanted to point out. As far as profiles and the way they handle AutoCAD Solids, let's go ahead and bring that up. I'm going to go to my Open, and you'll see that I'm going to bring up this drawing here, Annotation Slice Solids. So I'll first point out the change to a profile, and I'm going to go ahead and use my view and split this up to vertical. And you'll see here that I have a couple of AutoCAD objects. And I'll just point out that this is simply a block called, I've just actually imported it as 3D solid. I'll point out the block that it was brought in from, right? So just a simple 3D CAD object, right? Nothing really crazy here. If I pull up this object, you can see it's a 3D solid. I can import that in. It's particularly useful for modeling things in AutoCAD that you wouldn't be able to normally do in Civil 3D, whether it's a special type of pipe, an abutment for a bridge, things like that. So if I were to go in here and bring up my profile, and you can see that I'm at station around 600, I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the ability to project the solids onto this profile view. So if I simply go to my Home tab and I go to Profile View, you can see here I can choose to project objects to Profile View. I'm going to go ahead and select these two AutoCAD Solids. And you'll see that once I've selected them and press Enter, it's going to prompt me to select along a Profile View. Simply go ahead and I'll just click on that grid there and bring over my dialog window from my other screen. And you'll see that I'm going to just set a couple of solid styles here just so that we can talk a little bit about how the behavior changes depending on what you choose. So for the moment, I've chosen this Object Solids style for both of these objects, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you can see that I can see the entire solid in that view, right? So right now, it's just showing me what that object looks like in profile, but it's not actually showing me what's actually being cut by that profile in section. It's showing me the entire object. So if you wanted to be able to see a very specific cross-section, right, and specifically the cross-section of the object as it goes and passes through that profile, you'd have to be able to toggle the style. Now, the styles have been created in this particular drawing, so I'm going to toggle the style first to show you what that object looks like, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you what that changes in the style editor. So if I simply pick that object, I can, in fact, you know what, I'm going to do it globally. I'm going to go to my Profile View Properties, and that's jumped over there. I'm going to go to my projections, right? I'm going to pick both of these, and I'm going to go ahead and toggle these to Solids Section. And if I click OK, you can see I've now changed that style. Now you can see what that view looks like. So it's an actual cross-section of that object as it passes through the profile. All right? And as that object changes, you'll see that the section view changes along with it. So if I were to rotate, let me turn off OSnap, or simply start rotating this object, you can see that as I rotate, I get different section views of that object. The same is true for this object here. And now, why is that the case? Well, you really have a choice in how you want to show these things, but if I wanted to just check out the projection style and see where it put that dialog window, bear with me. There it is. That's what happens when you have 10 things open on 2 monitors. So let me bring that up again. So if I go to the style, you can see here that in profile, if I'm doing an AutoCAD Solid, I can have it checked with section. So that way it'll show it as the actual object as it's being cut in the profile. All right. So again, the ability to now add 3D solids allows you to refine your design views a little bit better. Things that you previously couldn't do at all with Civil 3D. I've now given you the ability through AutoCAD to project those objects so that you can have a better understanding of how your design process goes. All right. So let me go ahead and maximize this viewport, and I'm going to just take a look at my list. Yep. So now a couple of other things that I want to show you related to labels. So I mentioned this during the slide deck, that if I have a object and I place a label, that one of the new features in Civil3D is the ability to toggle which object it belongs to. So let's go ahead and do that as a demo. So if I'm going to just start off by selecting that surface, you'll see that my contextual ribbon allows me to go ahead and place a label. And I'm just going to add a very simple spot elevation, let's say right there. Okay? So this label currently belongs to the existing surface, right? So if I were to move it over here, you can see the value changes accordingly. Suppose that I want to be able to move that label so that it targets now, instead of the existing surface, the proposed surface. Well, in previous versions of Civil3D, you would have to just pick that surface and go back and add a new label at the location. Now with 2015, I can just simply pick that label and bring up my Properties dialog window. And you can see that in the Properties dialog window, I have the ability to choose the object that it's referring to simply through a drop-down. So if I had a surface that I wanted to toggle to, let's suppose it's Maggie Way FG, I could simply choose that, and those values will be updated automatically. So now that surface label belongs to that surface. If you do that and you get something along these lines, it's because the object you've switched it to, right, these question marks, the object you've switched it to is outside of the object area. So you can see here that the surface that I've attached this to, which is called Maddie Way Finished Grade, is off of that surface. The minute I move it back, I get actual values. All right, this is also true of other types of labels. A good example, another one would be a station label. So suppose that I go ahead and I choose that alignment, and I choose a station offset value, and I'm just going to throw in a label here, right? It's located right there. Right, you can see here it's pulling alignment Maddie Way, station X, offset Y. If I were to move that, I get a new value, of course. But I can, once again, just simply toggle that, and suppose I wanted to label this alignment here called O'Connell Way. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and through the Properties dialog window, I'm going to go ahead and click my drop-down once again and simply choose O'Connell Way. And you can see here that I have a new, it's pointing out the new alignment, the new station offset. Now, I know that some of you are going to probably try this on your own, and don't do the same mistake I did when I was playing around with it for the first time, which is make sure you're using a relevant label. So you'll see here that if I choose that alignment, and I go and I choose, instead of a fixed point station offset, your traditional station offset, and I drop that in, let's say there, that if I do the same thing, right, by simply selecting that label and then choosing O'Connell Way, those of you who saw that would see that, hey, it's just disappeared. Why did my label delete itself? It's not actually being deleted because it's a station offset value, and it was referring to, and I'll undo that, right, station 996. It's actually calling out station 996 and that same offset on O'Connell. All right, so just be aware of the label that you're using to prevent yourself from going slightly crazy as to why the tool isn't working the way it's supposed to. All right. So again, very subtle but very nice changes to let you go through and speed through those design changes very quickly. And then the last thing I want to show you that has to do with labels has to do with the way sections are labeled. So let's go ahead and bring that up, close that, minimize my footprint, and let's go ahead and select cross-section labels. Let's go ahead and open that up. So the feature that I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate for you has to do with the way that cross-section views labeled corridors. And if you've ever seen corridor labels, they kind of get a little bit crowded and oftentimes will overlap depending on the type of corridor that you have. Now, your previous fix was to use the surface to label that because when you had overlapping labels, you could use a surface label set to have them stagger so that they wouldn't be over on top of each other. The feature wasn't unfortunately available for corridors up until this version of 2015. So let's see what that looks like and how we can go ahead and effectively change that. So I'm going to first toggle off my scale to something that's more relevant to what we deal with cross sections. You can see here I have an alignment, I have some sample lines, and since I have some sample lines, I have the ability to create multiple section views. Now, I've already set this drawing up so that a lot of the styles are already set for me. So all I have to do is pretty much click Create Section Views and drop them in my drawing, and you'll see kind of what I mean here, right? So there are a number of labels that are being set, and there's a lot of overlapping. You can see here my daylighting and my edge of slope as well as my edge of travel way are all kind of on top of each other. So to give you a little bit of an overview of why this is and how it's controlled, let's just go and take a look at the corridors, right? So you can see here for corridors settings, if those of you are familiar with Civil3D know that these labels are controlled through the the code set styles. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my settings tab and go to my general collection and expand out multi-purpose styles and expand out code set styles and then select the one that I'm working with, right? And so if I were to expand out, links, points, you can see here that there are a number of styles associated with crown, for instance, and daylight, and a handful of others, all right? Now, these are the traditional way that labels have been done. One of the new features, and if I cancel out of that and minimize that, and I go to my section view, my sections, is now the ability to label through label styles for a section these corridor points. This is a brand new category inside of Civil3D 2015. And if I just double click that to open it up, you'll see that it's set up very similarly to what I have earlier. So in order for me to get these kind of code set points into Civil3D, there's a couple of ways, right? We can either change an existing one or create a brand new one. Let's go through the process of creating a brand new one, and I'm going to start doing that by doing a new label set. So I'm going to go ahead and click Cancel. I'm going to right-click on Label Sets and click New, and I'm going to just call this Staggered Labels. All right? So I'll just give it a name. In the Label section, I now have this new type called Corridor Points. And the one that I just showed you, this ADSK offset elevation, is already created for me. All I have to do is click Add. And now you see that you have the ability to stagger, right? So I have now the ability to click Stagger Labels, and I can either do to the right, to the left, or both sides, or of course no staggering. But the whole purpose of this demo is to stagger, so I'm going to go ahead and choose Stagger Both Sides. And I'm going to expand this out a little bit, and you'll see that Stagger Line 1 and 2 really have to do with the offsets used to create that sort of staggered line, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just make this 0.15 and 0.1, and 0.1, and you'll see I'll point out what these values indicate in the drawing itself. All right. So I'll go ahead and I'll click OK, and I've created that label set. And now there's two things to note. First and foremost, I'm going to do it the hard way, right? Now, if I was creating brand new sections and I wanted this label set to always use these new corridor points, there's something that I would need to do, and that's when I go to create new section views, right? I'm going to go to my commands. This is a brand new command setting. For those of you who are really deep into Civil3D editing of templates, you'll see that for create multiple section view, I have now the ability to toggle from corridor point code labeling method from the traditional way, section code set style, to this new style, the section label set. Now the section label set is what I just created there earlier, right? So if I go ahead and I toggle that, anytime I create a brand new set of cross sections from now at this point on, it would do that. This is obviously very relevant if you're doing this as part of your template. That way you do it once and you kind of basically walk away. You never have to worry about that again. So I'll go ahead and I'll set that to section label set, and I'll click OK. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete these sections here, and I'm going to place a new one. Now, those of you who are thinking ahead, you'll be wondering, well, if you already have that, how would you change that? And I'll show you that as well. So don't worry too much if you already have a series of labels that you'd want to edit. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my alignments and center line and random road and sample line groups, and I'm going to drill down to the section view group that I have in there, and I'm going to right-click and choose delete to remove them from the drawing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and step through the whole same process again. Right? I'm going to go ahead and create section views, and I'm going to create multiple views. And this time, before I just click Create Section Views, everything's set up for me. This time I'm going to jump over to the Section Display options, and I'm going to make sure that the label set being used is the one that I created called Staggered Labels. All right, so that's the one I just created during this demonstration. I'll go ahead and I'll click OK, and I'll go ahead and I'll click Create Section Views, and I'm going to drop those in, and you'll see that now I have that value. All right, so all of these came in quite nicely. Now, I'll go ahead and undo this, and I'll show you a command that's new to 2015, right? I'm going to bring this back to the point of just where before I deleted them, right? So let's say you have a series of sheets and you want to go ahead and use 2015 as part of your current flow, and you want to make these changes globally, right? So nobody wants to go ahead and start deleting and adding section views again. Now, while it was straightforward, you see it took me just a handful of clicks. Suppose that you wanted to convert these to existing. There is a, corridor section labels convert, right? So that's a new tool inside of, it's probably a handful, so you might want to come up with an alias, right, through the PGP editor to not have to type that in every time. But you can see I can just type in a little bit at the command line and it fills in the rest. So this corridor section label convert, if I toggle that, I can toggle the section views that I want, right? I can just type in all, and it grabs all of them, and then I can press enter. And then it allows me to convert all code point labels to either code set styles or corridor point styles, right? So the current version is this code set styles. I want to change it to corridor points. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and you'll see that 27 section views are converted, presto, and the command. And now you're probably wondering where my labels are. Now, for the most part, I've seen that even though it's been converted, you do need to do one extra step, which is to show those labels again. So again, I have that section view group that's in there. I'm going to go right-click and go to Properties. And in the sections, I can very quickly jump over and choose the Staggered Labels and click OK. And there you go. So you've kind of reached the same end. All right. So just be aware, convert. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Corridor section labels convert changes existing methods from 2014 and earlier to this new one in 2015. All right. And last but not least, I think there's only a handful of minutes left, surprisingly. I talked for longer than I expected to. So it's 11:52. I'm going to go ahead and just close this one drawing. I'm going to pull up the SubAssembly Composer. I'll just show a couple of new features, right? The two most important ones that I've seen. And then bring that up. And let me bring up this. Let me go and just choose an offset packet file. Okay, I'm presuming a lot by assuming that all of you use the SubAssembly Composer. Those of you that don't, SubAssembly Composer allows you to go ahead and create, let me fire up Civil3D and bring up my tool palettes, right? If you wanted to create your own subassemblies for whatever shape, size, kind of object that you'd like, you can do so via the SubAssembly Composer. Now, this tool has been around for a long time. The newest features here, I think that are worth showing in the time that I have, is the ability to create an offset and then a fill for a region within a particular subassembly. So you can see here I've started off with a simple subassembly that has a few links that go across, right? It's just a simple trapezoidal shape. If I wanted to create an offset of this, there's a new offset geometry tool that I can simply drag and drop. Right, you can see it's kind of connected, and I can simply choose an offset distance. Suppose I want to have a value of 1, right? I want to create a shell of 1. So let's say this is some sort of culvert or rectangular pipe or something along those lines. Now all I have to do is add all my offsets, and you'll see that it's created that offset very simply, right? Minimal amount of work trying to figure out where these points should be and how to connect the links, right? Even better is the ability to drag in a shape. Right, and if I wanted to make this a shape, you can see here that I can choose to either pick the inside or the overall, right? But if I want to pick the inside and create a region, I can just left-click and choose that, and now my shape is just that piece right there. So that's probably the biggest change. There are a handful of others there you can see in the help menu, but it's probably the one I think is the most significant within the SubAssembly Composer. And then last but not least, in the collaboration department, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up this drawing that already has a series of aerials mapped to it, georeferenced. You're going to see I'm going to go over here to my, and I can take all this information. I can simply go ahead and choose export, and let's choose other formats. And that's a lie. It's not through there. Should be able to export a KML file directly through, I believe it was here, and if not, then I'm lying, and it has to be done through output. Now I'm drawing a blank. Another case, maybe it's under publish. Could have sworn there was a KML here. In either case, certainly not blind, and it's definitely not there. There is an ability to export out through, maybe it's through geolocation. Nah. Anyways, I'll find that out, and for those of you who are curious, you have the ability to export this out to a KML and ultimately a KMZ file. When you do that, you'll have the ability to open up that file in Google Earth, and again, just view your model as it is in situ, just relevant to your overall project area.